You're welcome. My name is Eugene O'Brien. I'm from the Research Driven Solutions company, and we were going to talk about the CEDR recommendations for biodiversity and invasive species. So, Hanslin is going to open.
Yep. Now I'll try in a few slides to present our EPICroads project. We were like a core personnel of like 5 or 6 researchers, but when I summed up, there were quite a lot of people involved. Mainly from my institute, the NIBIO, the Swedish Agricultural University, the Spanish National Research Council, and the Technical University of Munich. The project was funded through this CEDR research program on biodiversity. With these funding nations, and we set out to kind of dig deep into the knowledge of road ecology, with a target to provide some practical guidelines in the end. And the way we did this was to review existing knowledge and summarize it in reports and scientific papers, and then to identify and interpret key results and put these into practical guidelines. And these guidelines were not like just how to do stuff, it was also including information on why you should take different measures. So we produced an initial report. It's more like a mapping exercise where we did a broad literature survey, a number of reports and some papers, and then in the end these practical guidelines. The initial work on this literature review, or it's more like a systematic mapping, gave input to the other tasks, but there were quite a few issues that appeared at this stage, not really surprising, but clearly, as we also heard earlier this week, the evidence of road impacts is rather fragmented, context-dependent, species-specific, etc. And it's also quite surprising to see how many of the published papers that lack quite essential information on the road they have studied, like the road type, traffic volume. That was very surprising. But most of this is not funded by road authorities, but I hope at least when you have projects running that you make sure that all details also appear in the papers. We also see that most of the studies use quite simple indicators of status or processes, and we see like species occurrence and species richness are most frequently used, and very few organism groups are evaluated together. So clearly we have to go from species occurrence patterns to population and community dynamics to really understand what's going on along roads. Building on this initial mapping, we did meta-analysis and to test how road type, habitat characteristics, and feeding yields affected the bird responses in bird richness to roads. Started with quite a few papers, but ended up with only 18 studies. That's not much. We found some differences, some impact of the landscape, and also some differences between the feeding yields. And this one is published. We also addressed, and this was a major part of the work, how the road size can favor biodiversity of conservation concern, like looking at the potential positive effects of roads and the importance, or the factors important for that. And here we, in addition to the systematic approach, use snowballing and also include the gray literature when possible. Yeah, all these reports are on some of the CEDR pages, so I recommend you to go and take a look at them. Quite some information there. I cannot go through really results here, but we see clearly that the roadsides can constitute species-rich habitats and provide resources for species in the landscape context. And this is set by a number of interacting ecological variables. But here we have really a lot of papers and a lot of context dependence. So here more focused reviews, more narrow reviews are needed to kind of get the real essence out of it. We also modeled, a bit on the side, modeled how high quality roadsides may contribute to landscape connectivity in a set of butterflies. Some generalists and some specialists. And we were happy we found a very good data set from South Central Sweden that we could use for this, and found that, not surprising, that responses in specialists and generalists are different, where the generalists could be very able to use smaller structures of high quality roadsides as stepping stones, while the specialists in this case needed more continuous structures. Yeah, and also that the high quality roadsides were more important in what you can say low quality landscapes. And then I of course in addition get the additional habitat effect. We also developed, or started to develop a classification system to evaluate the potential for biodiversity in roadside habitats. That should be quite simple to use, but still try to capture as much of the complexity as possible. And we developed a very simple qualitative three-stage point evaluation of this, with the main categories of the landscape aspect, the ecotone aspect, and the habitat part of it. And it should be flexible concerning availability of data and that kind of problems. But we clearly see that this would need some regional adjustment or calibration, such as the consideration of the species pool, soil moisture, and intensity of management, and some other issues that we will come back to later. When we have done all this, made these reports, we picked the most relevant and the best supported information, and worked this into a set of guidelines for how to improve habitats along roads. And this we did with 3 spatial or kind of also ecological scales in mind: the landscape, the ecotone, and the habitat. And in this case, when we talk of the ecotone, we mean like the transition zones in along the, along but especially across the road verges. Yeah, there were some restrictions. We excluded the large mammoths because CEDR had a separate projects on that. We had a European perspective. And as earlier, lots of knowledge gaps that we pointed out in the guidelines and in the reports. So for each of these, we had tried to identify the most critical measures to prevent or mitigate road impact. Yeah, and looked into quite a lot of factors here. And also, for many of these, we also provide solutions of how to overcome certain constraints and to kind of realize the potential of in the landscape, so that the road verges can function as high-quality habitats or as corridors for dispersal. That was kind of in brief. I'm not sure how many hundred pages we produced, but there are quite some good reports that you can take a look at. Yeah.
So now, thank you. So the CEDR report will be based on two projects, the EPICroads project Hans Martin just described, and the ControlInroads project.
So because all the information can find on the website on ControlInroad.com, and it was also, our project was also financed in the CEDR Transnational Road Research Program called 2016, and we worked together, AIT, with Harry, Anta, Argis, and Sasso. And the project was structured in different work packages. So first we wanted to know what kind of invasive species are in this main or European countries. So we published a paper with all the relevant information, and also we published a booklet with all the invasive species and the methods how to get how to treat them. Then we also looked on alternative methods for invasive species management. So first we looked on more biological management. So we tried to do some greenhouse tests on ragweed, and then we went out on field and tested some 10 different treatments against ragweed. So we had a field outside with ragweed. We used electricity, we used hot foam, we used infrared, we used grazing, we rooted up, we used pelargonic acid. And in this morning, I already showed you that like electricity, hot foam, infrared, and also uprooting were more the best. And then also we did a field trial where on three different locations on Falloppia, and there we used in the first year electricity, and we did this treatment according to the physiology of the plant. So we started in June when the plant reached his final length, and this was the first treatment, and the second treatment was in autumn before the plant allocated all the resources back to the rhizomes. And there we could, with the electricity, we haven't seen any change in the size of the plants or how many plants were there, but we found out that the plants were smaller. And then in the second year, we also, in one location, we included hot foam, but we have to say that hot foam, it's very labor intensive. And we had seen a great impact on the next year, that we really had less plants and hot foam compared to electricity or nothing done. Then also we looked up what are the, in the moment, what people doing on the road, and we tried to combine this for a good practice guide. And based on our analysis or our field trials and also our knowledge on invasive species management, we analyzed the cost of the treatment and which is the best treatment for the to maintain or to reduce the number of the different invasive species. And then in the end, we did some recommendation. For the Falloppia, we found out that if we have low plant density, medium density, or a really high plant density, there is always the herbicide treatment, the most cost-effective measurement. But also digging and disposal was from the cost benefit in the medium plant density and also in the low plant density quite reasonable. So, but then we came up what are the main processes for the management of invasive species on road sector, and we figured out that often for real management of invasive species, there is a lack of money or resources. Also, the responsibilities are not really clear. And there is a need of raise awareness and also information about invasive species also for the people which are working on the street or the citizen. And the general principle is first have to have an inventory, then you have the treatment together with the disposal, and then also control the effectiveness as monitoring. This is very important, otherwise you have to treat the several years. And this has needs to be planned and also used in a construction manner. What are our recommendations? So there is really a lack of funding to control invasive species for a longer period. So this really needs it. Now we only have like 3 years. Normally this is a project, and there you have 3-year project time. But then you leave these field trials often because of lack of money, and the invasive species come back. And also there's cross-sector efforts are needed between road, waterways and railway infrastructure, but also including agricultural land, because agriculture is often beside the roads. For an efficient control, a better knowledge on the ecology of the plant is required. So when is the best time to treat? And also like for Fallopia, that is, it's not good to treat it too early because they can regrow, also ragweed, they build new seeds and so on. And to prevent also the seed setting, it's an important point for invasive species management. And also the early management of invasive species area is really easy way to prevent the spread of invasive species and also to reduce the cost. And this also means that maybe now also digital tools should be included, like vehicles which can scan the road verges and to find out where are the invasive species. Also in many European countries, different stakeholders are involved, and there's often a disagreement about responsibilities. And it's particularly important to increase awareness of invasive species through information and also training. And also in some countries, there's no regulation for the use of contaminated soils, for example, in Germany and Austria. And there is an urgent need for legislation in all countries, so that soil which are contaminated with a certain kind of invasive species should be treated as hazard waste. And also there in general, there is an urgent need for legal obligation to deal with invasive species in all sector and all transmission pathways. So this was very fast, the summary of the project. And as I already told you, there are much more information on the homepage. We have all the picture of the plants, we have all the reports, we have the presentation which we have given during the project time, and also our final report is you can find there. Thank you very much.
So we have one more presentation. So I'm Eugene O'Brien, so this is my presentation. So we were asked by CEDR to develop the final report, and they gave us a limit, should be 25 to 30 pages, so they want something short. And today we want to present the main recommendations, and they're in the form of posters around the room. And we want your feedback on them to hopefully incorporate that. We'll finalize the report in the middle of next month. So in 2016, they commissioned these 2 projects. These are the draft recommendations. So we're addressing measures to enhance biodiversity in the roadsides and how to deal with invasive alien plants. It will be a practical guide for non-experts. I'm a civil engineer, so please correct any mistakes in my biology if you wish. And today we want your input. We want to see how can we improve and are there things that we should remove. We're recommending that each road owner should do three things. They should identify priority areas in the landscape and in their network that have potential for biodiversity enhancement. And Margarita did a presentation, an excellent presentation, where she called them biodiversity hotspots. I think it's a good term. So identify your biodiversity hotspots. Second is to develop a national or regional maintenance handbook. And the third one is an invasive species policy. Of course, some countries will already have this done. There are also recommendations for road construction. If you're building a road or perhaps widening a road, what should you be doing about biodiversity? And recommendations for maintenance. So we've set up the main recommendations in the form of 6 posters. We started off with 6 large posters. When we went to print them, then we discovered that they couldn't print them. So now there are 12 posters. So sorry about the confusion, but there are 6 pairs of posters posted around the walls here. And the goal today is to get your feedback on those posters. So first poster is over near the door, and there's 2 of them there. First pair of posters is priorities for biodiversity enhancement. So things like, be similar to the surrounding landscape, things like soil properties, things like agrochemicals, it's a negative obviously, and the value of the roadside depends on its distance from and its connection to the landscape. So these are the main bullet points that we're extracting from the reports that we received, and we're asking for your feedback on them. And then Hans Martin already mentioned the rating system, a way to rate your roadside. So there's 13 criteria, A1, A2, and so on, and each of them gets a score, and all the scores are added up in the end. So we'd very much like to see your feedback on that. Second poster, or pair of posters, is about invasive species, and this comes from ControlInroad, like Friederike was talking about. So the most cost-effective methods for 3 focus species here, 3 particularly problematic species, and the advantages and disadvantages of various methods of treatment. So all the methods that we could think of are listed here, and their advantages and disadvantages, and what they might be suitable for. Poster 3 is in this corner behind me. It's the first maintenance poster on the master plan. So the maintenance master plan should specify the maintenance schedule. We're recommending that every road authority develop a maintenance master plan. It should be complex. The road should be broken into many different segments, and they should have different maintenance regimes. So it's going to be complicated, but that's probably a good thing. So lots of stuff in there, transition zones, ecotones. I now believe I know what an ecotone is. And a prioritization process, such as the one we have on the poster 1. Also, we did a list of possible priority species groups that you might focus on when you're doing your maintenance master plan. So the pollinators could be one, wetland insects could be one, rare plants could be one. These are opportunities for the roadside to add something back to biodiversity. The 4th poster is on my left. It's also maintenance, and it's about the frequency of cutting and when to cut, and whether you should be removing the cuttings. So when early, late summer or autumn cuttings, and should you remove it? So, obviously it's always good to remove, but it's expensive. So when is it most important to remove the cuttings? 5th poster, it's on the door over there and beside the door. It's the first of the construction ones. It's about impacts and spontaneous colonization. So construction impacts is easy enough. There are, of course, negative impacts, very well documented. But there are also potential positive impacts. I'm sure the net is negative, but there are potential positives. So where there are species of conservation concern that might be compatible with the roadside habitat. And there are some examples, rare plants, for example, that only survive on the roadside now. The second poster, or second part of that poster, is about spontaneous colonization. We thought this table might be useful, but we were missing some pieces. So we have some distances between patches that would tell you if less mobile invertebrates might be able to disperse. But for plants, we'd like to get a little bit more resolution in that, so we welcome some input on that. Poster number 6, the final one, it's at the far end there. That's also on construction, and it's on the effectiveness of mitigation measures. So there are general mitigations. So for example, for roadkill, you might fence, obviously. I wrote that down as very good. You might increase visibility with low vegetation near the edges and so on. I would like to get your comments on that and your suggested changes to that. Also, there are particular things you might do in particular habitats. So in a warm place, for example, you might have snakes basking in the hot surfaces. So you might put in gravel patches to attract them away from the road. Is that effective? I would like your feedback on that. So we're ready to go to the more interesting part of this whole presentation. So from about 5:30, for about 20 minutes, we're going to ask you to wander around the room, take some of these Post-its, write your comments on as many posters as you can get to, and give us your feedback. I also have little green dots. If you like something, you can just stick on a little green dot. People working online, do they have the link? Yeah. Yes, there. Okay. Okay, so that's it for the next 20 minutes.
So let's start. I suggest you to work on it during 5 or 6 minutes, and then if you agree and if you have finished to add your comments, then we can move to another slide. Okay for everybody? Okay, so I will share my screen. Okay, let's go. You have the hand on comments.
So we're going to give each group 3 minutes to report. Okay. Okay, so Hans Martin was taking care of poster number 1, so you have 3 minutes to tell us what your group decided.
Plenty of good input, and pointing out some weaknesses, but also some good parts of this approach with priorities for biodiversity enhancement. So clearly we need some calibration, like local or regional calibration, depending on what system you're working in. At least for some of these indicators, or what we should call them. There are also suggestions for some additional categories, invasive species, and also on the current state of the roadwork. Is it of low or high quality at the moment? And perhaps also add one on future conditions, if we can say something about the situation in like a changing climate.
Changing what?
Climate. Yeah, that was quite quick and dirty, some of the key points. But I will refine it a bit more. There were quite some good ones.
Excellent.
Perhaps what we didn't discuss as much was if there should be some weighing of the scores. And yeah, that should be considered. But
Sorry, some?
Weighing? When you give
Weighting, yes.
Weighting.
So we among the PEB from CEDR, I brought this point up, and we introduced a weighting system, and we got the votes of the PEB membership, and we introduced weights, and at the next meeting they decided it was too complicated. The weights weren't greatly different. Some were about twice others. They didn't make an enormous difference to the score, so we felt that the complexity wasn't justified.
Oh. Next one.
Because I will take the floor just for because remote participants also. Thank you. I will take because the remote participants also work mostly for the reporting on the first poster. So there was some questions that were raised up by participants. It's also the habitat quality for landscape has to be taken into account, and it has also to take into account also something that can be comparable during the time. We have also to take care on that point. Also, the synthesis table has to be more explained. It's important also to have something beyond this table, really to be understandable by stakeholders. And the feeling from remote participants, it was more framework, and it was also we have to find tools to make it usable to compare a project among each other to be done to improve that way. I try also to. Sorry, because I try to make a synthesis, and it's what is also very important. It's to take into account what is used by people that are not familiar with biodiversity issues, like planners or engineers, and it has to be assessed by ecologists. And I think this part has to be also be developed. I have more things that I took note, but it was also key issues that we discussed within the remote participant for poster 1. But I have other comments for more general for the global exercise. So, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Pia was leading number 2.
Yeah. Does this work? Yes, it is working. So unfortunately, we didn't get too much feedback. Apparently, everyone knows and about controlling invasive species. What I think came up with in our discussion was that we're suggesting a new methodology which is still in testing. So there's really a question of whether we want to include that in a guideline, even though we don't really know whether it's working. And on the other hand, we are missing potentially some very well-working innovative methods in these guidelines. So that's maybe something that we can discuss within the PEP again, or I don't know, maybe someone here has an opinion about that. That would be very helpful. Please come to me afterwards if you think that we should not include innovative methods in general, or if we should, with, you know, kind of a caution, this is just in testing. Yeah, and then we also, I mean, one of the comments, which I think also makes a good point here, is that we only have, like the cost benefit, we have it only for 3 species. There are obviously more than 3 problematic species. Yeah, so, I mean, the results from the ControlInroad didn't give any more, or didn't do this analysis in any more species. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you. Do you have anything to add on that, Yannick?
No.
On invasives. Okay, so Tuan.
Thanks. I have to report about the discussions about the master plan. The comments were most of the time on the first poster. On the second poster we haven't had so many comments, but I focus on the most important ones, and a few commanders have said, keep it simple. The master plan should be simpler, or more simple than we were suggesting, because it's meant to organize a master plan of green management for engineers and and managers, and not for the biologists among us. So it should be an overall plan with regular guidelines, not specific guidelines for each diverse habitat type. So it must be realistic, it must be simple. That were the main comments. But there was also somebody who lacked a strategy to improve the low-value road verges, to improve biodiversity by better management, green management. And where do we find this room? Because the budget is already lowered. But well, it must be something to think about within the PEP. How can we focus on enhancing biodiversity in verges that have at this moment a low biodiversity? I do think there's a question.
Yeah, I just want to make a short comment. If we want to make it more simple, it's going to be really hard to just focus on hotspots. Then we need to focus on much larger areas. That's my experience from Sweden. We have species-rich row verges, and approximately 5% of our row verges are defined as species-rich, and they are declining because it's really hard to maintain the best practice all of the time, all of the years. So if you just focus on the hotspots, then the biodiversity will decline instead of increasing as we want.
Yeah. It's a good point. But we were thinking about this master plan not only on the biodiverse hotspots that are actually hotspots, but also on circumstances that have good potential to become hotspots. And maybe then the area would be 20–25%.
I was the one who made the comment about keep it simple. Maybe I was been misunderstood. What I mean by keep it simple is what's very costly is to send out maintenance crews every day for something else. So they need to sort of go through the verges, and they can leave out like the hot spots and then go back later in the season. But it has to be simple in that they're not gardeners. You have to remember they're not gardeners, not going out every day. They've got other things to do too. So you have to keep it simple in terms of how the maintenance is going to function.
Very good. Anders, have you the mic? Yes.
Hello. Was the word mine? Yeah. Not many wanted to discuss this matter with me, cutting frequency and removal. Actually, it was none. But I know that some of you are interested in this matter, so I have shared a copy of these posters with you and asked you to comment later, next week or so, I think it's possible. And if someone of you want to think of this overnight after the gala dinner or something, you are welcome to have a copy of this. But we have a lot of comments already, and I'll start here and say that most of them say that it's removal of the grass is important, but remember the insects. That's I think the conclusion here. And I think also that most of these comments agree with the conclusion that you have made from the reports about these situations where it's recommended to cut early, late summer or autumn. And someone has also pointed out that combinations of these is possible, or should be possible, or sometimes recommended.
I should say that none of this is really mine because I stole it all from Hans Martin and Friederike.
I can perhaps add about, there tends to sometimes be, when we're talking about removal or leaving the cuttings there, opposition between botanists and invertebrate specialists. And so you really have to figure out your goals. And when we're not raking the cuttings, it's not, again, we're not gardening along roads. So when you're talking about removal, it's aspiration usually. And that takes everything away. So you really have to think about it.
So I should say that I had even fewer people than Anders. So nobody came to talk to me about poster 5. But we're going to extend the deadline by a week. So the end of next week is the final deadline. And we would invite people to use the Miro platform. The mail went out from Charlotte about 2 weeks ago to all IENE members. So the link is there. Anybody with the link can go on and make comments on the online version. So number 6, Elke.
I was lucky. I had some people to discuss with me. Thanks for that. We started and stick to the first part of the double poster, which was the one without question marks. We discussed that we should not forget to put avoidance always in front of all possible mitigations because it's the most effective. Then we could do we could refer to the IENE handbook, which is online and being updated regularly from now, so the most recent things will be found there as well. We discussed, we got a remark that in the roadkill impact we should add as a mitigation measure to avoid foraging, to not attract the animals. We discussed about noise pollution and noise barriers and came to the conclusion that we do not have much knowledge about how the animals... Well, we know that there is an impact, but we don't know how much and how far noise barriers could really reduce that, because it's not so much the intensity of the noise, the volume, but more the characteristics that the animals react on. So that might be something for further research. And to summarize the comments of the second part, unfortunately we didn't get solutions for our question mark fields. There was a comment on the de-icing salt that we are still lacking better solutions because we have to be aware of the danger of eutrophication if we use alternatives. The effectiveness of the fences in the flatland, which we marked as very effective, got the comment that it's only very effective if constructed and maintained well. Yeah, I think that's the most important from our group.
Thank you. So, Yannick, do you want to make any final comments from the online group?
Yeah, the main remark of the online group is it's really a challenge also to have a reaction during the short time that we had, and they also would like to know if it would be possible to continue also to work for those who are interested to work on the document that was put online on the Miro, to let for those who are interested to more time, and it also require, if possible, to have access to the draft version of the document you mentioned earlier for 25 or 30 pages, to have a better background on what is behind those tables, because those tables are integrated in a more broader reflections, and they are the synthesis of a more global process. And it's also useful if you estimate necessary to have more details and reactions from the people who take part to this workshop, to let it open during maybe a slot of time that you estimate the best.
The full draft document is available online.
Okay.
And there was a link to it provided in the same email.
Okay, so then I didn't had okay. And Tony also said that please keep it simple, as it was said earlier, to be done, because maintenance staff are not scientists, and they are practitioners, and they do not have too much time to dedicate also to learn how to proceed. And it's if something is ready to be done or ready to be used, it's also very important. And yes, but main comment was also to have a bit more time for React and to provide some more details on reactions. But maybe for people that are here, it would be interesting for you to provide the Miro link and the link to the document. So
I'm not sure how to do that.
yeah, but I think yeah, please.
I mean, it's gone to all IENE members.
Yes. So about keeping it simple, we have a research project which is starting, and I don't know if Lukas Bolak would like to say a word, because it would interest, I think, everybody. They might want to share experiences.
Hello, everybody. So we are doing a research program to look at mowing machines and their effect on ecology, because now there are a couple of new systems that try to improve the situation in terms of ecology, so for the insects and invertebrates, but also the plants. And we're trying to do field research with the machines, and we're looking for people who have already done similar projects. And if you know anyone, or you are someone who has, please contact me.
So basically, we're trying to the industry that produces the mowing machines. We're trying to create incentives for them to give us machines that will work on an industrial way. So we're going along, but that are less destructive, because basically they've been developed for other needs than what our needs are, and I'm pretty sure they can do better.
So I would say, if people would like the link to the Miro or to the original document, just put your name on the list. So I'll put your name on a sticky note and give it to me. We have lots of sticky notes. And I would say it's 6:31, so we Yes, sorry, last comment.
I just want to tell that next spring we will end a 3-year project where we have been having a special machine for cut and collect, and that we also used for the production of bioenergy. So we use the biomass for production of bioenergy. It's a very successful project. So I think everyone here that's interested, please be in contact with me, and I will give you the information and the publications when it's done. The report.
Okay, so thank you all for your contributions. It was a very different kind of an event, but I think it was extremely useful. We have lots of sticky notes and lots of feedback. Thank you.
Okay.